The ponies of Ponyville gazed on the scene in the center of town in fear and awe. None of them dared to get close to the scene, none of them knowing what to make of the strange creature in the blue that stood underneath the dark Hydra. But the CMC knew who he was, and they also knew that they were safe. "Superman!" All three of them cried out in joy. Superman smiled at them and turned his attention back to the Hydra. The creature was still trying to crush him with its foot, not realizing how futile it was. Superman brought his right hand back into a fist and swung it straight into the Hydra's foot. The CMC cried out in amazement, as the rest of Ponyville cried out in terror as the Hydra was sent flying across the town, landing a good football field length away from the ponies. Superman watched the Hydra sail away with a smile before turning around to the three fillies. "The three of you all right?" he asked. All three of them nodded and looked past him to where the Hydra had been tossed. "How about I get you someplace safe?" They nodded again, and Superman scooped them up into his arms. He looked around for any familiar members of the three, spotting Applejack and her friend on a tree house across the city. With a single boost of speed, Superman made it over to the house. "Special delivery!" he said with a smile. The ponies nearly fell off the top of the tree as he descended gently onto the roof, placing the three fillies down at his feet. "Applejack!" Applebloom said with a smile. She ran into her sister and tossed a huge hug around her. Applejack bent over and returned the hug, tears falling down her face. "Applebloom, you're all right! I thought you were..." Applebloom released her hug and smiled at her sister. "It's okay. We weren't in any danger. Superman was there." Applejack and Twilight each looked to Superman, who was watching the scene with a smile on his face. Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle each moved to the side as Twilight approached him. Who are... Go! Superman and the ponies turned towards the Hydra, which was now picking itself out of the rubble of the town. It looked around for Superman, roaring in a bloodthirsty rage. "Excuse me for a moment," Superman said to the ponies, ascending back into the air. He flew straight for the Hydra, reaching it just as soon as it turned towards him. The Hydra went airborne once again as Superman collided with its side, tossing the beast back into the air. He watched as it slammed to the ground outside of town. Struggling to get back up, Superman flew in front of it, crossing his arms as all four heads turned towards him. "I'm only going to say this once. Leave," he said in his sternest voice, but he already knew how this was going to go down. The Hydra roared and tried to bite down on him with one of its heads. Superman caught the creature's jaw and flung the Hydra over his head. It landed in the Everfree Forest, far away from the town. Superman shook his head and turned to where the ponies needed help. He was just about to move when he heard what sounded like a laser beam. He quickly moved to the side as 4 beams of pure darkness flew by him and incinerated the main building in the town. Superman slowly turned around to face the Hydra, which was laughing at the destruction. "You think that's funny, do you? Hurting ponies and destroying their homes. I'll show you something that's really funny." Superman flew straight into the Hydra's gut. Doubling it over, he drove his shoulder into its gut and lifted it into the air over the forest. With a massive shrug, he launched the Hydra into the air and quickly flew behind it. He grabbed its foot and spun it around in the air before tossing it over him with a yell. The Hydra flew across the sky and landed in the field outside the town. The Hydra staggered to its feet, doing its best to glare through the pain at Superman. The 4 heads roared and started to wrap around each other until they formed a 4-headed cannon. Darkness began to form at the center of the 4 heads, which now aimed for Superman. "Cool trick. I can do it too," Superman said softly, concentrating his power into his eyes and turning them red. The Hydra let loose its dark blast straight at the Man of Steel, unleashing its full power. Superman smiled, and then his rage flowed forth from his eyes, letting his heat vision lance straight into the oncoming darkness. The 2 attacks collided, and the darkness was immediately pierced by the heat that Superman shot from his eyes. The laser continued to lance through the Hydra's attack until it had completely pushed back the darkness and straight into the Hydra's head. The Hydra screamed in agony as the heat vision burned through its heads, quickly turning them to ash. One last roar of rage escaped the Hydra's lips before its heads were completely burned away. Superman seized his attack and looked at the now headless Hydra, which stood motionless. He exhaled in the body's direction, and the corpse collapsed. "Maybe I went a little overboard, but I'm fairly certain that their heads grow back," he mused to himself. He shrugged his massive shoulders and turned back towards the village. Taking off, he quickly reached the area above the town and slowly descended into its center, unsure what to expect. He simply stood in the center of town and waited, arms crossed and eyes closed. He could hear them coming, slowly, very slowly. He also heard their heartbeats. Hearts that beat extremely fast and full of fear. Then he heard a sound that made him smile. Apple Bloom, Scootaloo, and Sweetie Belle were running his way. "That was incredible!" All three of them yelled as they all tried to skid to a stop at the same time, which resulted in a pile-up. The three laughed as Superman bent down to meet them. "Girls, get away from that!" All four of them looked to the sound of the voice, and a rainbow blur flew straight into Superman's chest. He did his best to move backwards so the Pegasus wouldn't break herself on his body. The moment she connected, she bounced to the side and rolled across the ground, coming up in an attack stance. "Get away from them," she said in a dangerous voice. Superman simply raised an eyebrow and looked down at the three. "You know her?" he asked them. "Didn't you hear what I said?" the Rainbow Pegasus screamed. Superman rolled his eyes. "Yes, I'll be with you in a moment. Now, girls, do you know her?" "Yeah, she's Rainbow Dash, my idol," Scootaloo said with a smile. Now that Superman knew that she wasn't a threat, he stood up and took a step back from the fillies. Artie slowly walked over to the fillies, keeping her eyes on him the entire time. "Are you three alright?" she asked of them, eyes still on Superman. "Yeah, Superman saved us," Scootaloo said with a smile. Artie looked at the three in confusion. "Wait, you know him?" she asked. The three nodded vigorously. "Yeah, he's Superman," all three of them said. Rainbow Dash still wasn't sure what to make of him, but Applejack and Twilight chose that moment to run onto the scene. Applejack came to a stop next to her sister, but Twilight ran right up to Superman. He looked down at her just as she looked up at him. "What are you?" she eventually asked. "I'm Superman, and I'm here to help," he said with one of his smiles. The smile just resulted in Twilight backing up a bit, not liking the look of his canines. "So, Superman," Twilight said with some hesitation. "So, are you a superhero?" "I would thought my actions would have spoken for themselves, but yes, I'm a superhero." The three of the adult ponies looked up at him with some confusion, but the fillies just ran up to him again with smiles on their faces. "I can't believe how easily you beat that Hydra!" Sweetie Belle exclaimed. "How can you fly so fast without wings? It's not fair!" Scootaloo pouted. "Thanks for saving us. Again," Apple Bloom said with a bashful smile. "Like I said, whenever you need me," Superman replied, returning their smiles. Applejack looked from Superman to the fillies, starting to put two and two together. A small smile creased her lips, and she slowly walked forward to Superman. "So you're the one who helped my sister and her friends on the barn?" she asked, already knowing the answer to her question. Superman smiled and nodded in response. Twilight stepped forward, about to ask another question, when a roar of rage echoed throughout the destroyed village. Every pony there looked to find that their Hydra was getting back up to its feet. Now with 8 heads instead of 4, it stood up and hissed in rage, heading back towards the city. While the majority of the population started to scream and flee, Superman let out a sigh. "Doesn't that thing know when it's beat?" He looked down at the ponies surrounding him. "Excuse me, I'll be right back." He pointed one fist into the air and shot off towards the Hydra, the force of his lift knocking most of the ponies there over. He came to a stop right in front of the beast, which narrowed his eyes at him and hissed. "Come on now. After our last bout, don't you really think you can?" He was cut off mid-sentence as one of the Hydra heads had turned and fired a blast of dark energy straight towards the ponies, more particularly the 3 fillies and their friends and family. None of the ponies even had time to react as the blast of darkness Superman placed himself between the ponies and the dark magic, bracing himself for the pain. When the pain from the blast arrived, it arrived in force. He could feel his body cry out in agony as the pain from the magical blast washed over him, as magic was one of the few things in all the universe that could hurt him. But unlike the dreaded kryptonite, he could withstand this. He planted both feet into the ground where he stood and tossed his arms open, absorbing as much of the blast as he could. He looked behind him to make sure the ponies were safe, and a sight greeted him that he loathed to see. He had made a mistake. A blast of dark magic had slipped under his arm and had headed right for Apple Bloom. But before the blast could hit her, an orange pony had pushed her out of the way, taking the full blast herself. She skidded across the ground and lay there silently. The one called Applejack had a nasty gash across her side and was bleeding profusely, lying motionless on the ground. Applebloom and the others were beside her, trying everything they could to stop the bleeding. The one called Twilight seemed to be using some kind of magic to try to close the wound, but the dark magic kept rejecting her own. Superman could barely see. The pain caused by the dark magic was forcing his eyes closed, but what he heard next far outstripped any pain he could experience. "Please don't die! I can't lose you too!" Applebloom cried out, trying to garner a response from her motionless sister. Lose you too? Did that mean Applebloom had lost someone else in her life? Someone she had loved? She was instantly reminded of his parents, his home, how he had lost it all, and how these children were going to lose everything they cared about because he couldn't fight back. "No," he whispered. All the ponies looked to him as his eyes began to glow red again, rage coursing through his veins with a yell so fierce that it shook the planet to its very core. Superman unleashed his Nova Vision against the darkness in the face of pure energy. The darkness had no hope of victory and was immediately blasted into oblivion by the beam. The beam decimated the darkness and headed straight for the Hydra. The creature didn't even have time to blink before its heads were once again blasted into ash. It staggered back, for 16 heads emerged from its body with a roar, angered that it had been beheaded again. What it saw the moment it could see again was a blue and red blur of rage slam into the creature's gut, resulting in the creature's blood ending up outside of its body. Before it could blink, Superman, still lodged in its gut, soared up into the sky, bringing the massive serpent with it. The creature roared in fury and pain as the two blew past the cloud and cover and headed into the stratosphere. He finally reached the point he wanted, hovering high over the gorgeous planet. The creature struggled to breathe under these conditions, but the matter of air was quickly ignored when it realized that it was above the planet, and that Superman was the only thing between it and a very long drop. Superman removed himself from the creature's gut and watched it begin to fall, before flying over and catching it around one of its throats. "I should drop you," he said in an angry voice, allowing his eyes to glow red. The creature looked at him with its green eyes for a moment before the green faded away. The Hydra blinked twice and opened its now blue eyes. It groggily looked down at the planet, slowly comprehending where it was. All of its eyes opened in terror as it slowly looked up at Superman. Superman narrowed his eyes, noticing the change. A moment ago, this creature hadn't cared that it was floating above a planet. All it cared about was destroying him, but now it looked at him, eyes full of fear, eyes begging him not to let go. This was not the same creature that had tried to murder hundreds of ponies and wipe out a city. Now it was just terrified. Superman knew the effects of mind control had worn off.